Hey guys, welcome back to the Wario Land Marathon. Hold on, I think I left the 3D on from last time. There we go. Anyway, today we're going to be looking at Wario Land 2 for the Game Boy Color. I know I said in my last video that the next video would be the 2 minigames highlight reel, but I haven't really had a whole lot of time to do serious video editing, so in the time that I have had, I've just tried to spend it playing Wario Land 2, so I could get this review out a little faster. So, sorry if you were looking forward to that, but it will be out soon-ish. I'm still working on it. Anyway, let's get straight into the review to see how Wario Land 2 holds up. First off, let's take a look at the story of this game. Wario Land 2's story seems to actually have a little bit of thought put into it to make it more than a simple bad guys steal Wario shit and he goes to get it back plot. While that is what happens to set up the story, there's a bit more to it than that. See, the gang of pirates that stole Wario's treasure are actually the same enemies from the first Wario Land, even being led by the same girl that we saw at the end of Wario Land 1. This girl is Captain Syrup, and she's out to seek revenge on Wario for invading her island back in the first game. There are even little cutscenes in between worlds to show Wario chasing Captain Syrup and her gang into the next world. This, alongside the addition of an intro cutscene, one that actually makes sense and explains what's going on, makes Wario Land 2's story the best of the series so far, even if it's for the presentation alone. The only gripe I have about the story is that in the opening cutscene, as well as the ending cutscene, the music stops playing during every scene transition. I know this is a little more than a nitpick, but it is pretty weird. Not only does it do this during scene transitions and cutscenes, but it also does it every time you go through a door for the entire game. I never got used to it either, so every time it happened, it bothered me a little bit. While we're on the subject of music, Wario Land 2 boasts a pretty solid soundtrack. While it's not as good as Virtual Boy Wario Land's OST, it does sport a groovy title theme, a nice credits theme, and a great remix of Wario Land 1's main theme. Later into the game, however, it randomly uses a song straight from Wario Land 1's soundtrack with no changes that I noticed at all. It's really out of nowhere, and it's definitely not one of the better songs from the original Wario Land, so it kinda sticks out as a small blemish on an otherwise pretty good soundtrack. It goes for the same vibe as Wario Land 1's soundtrack while improving the melodies to sound catchier and the instrumentation to sound a little less like farts as I described it in my Wario Land 1 review. Alongside the solid soundtrack, Wario Land 2 has some amazing sprite work, a bright and vibrant color palette, unique level themes, and great enemy design. As far as the level themes go, my favorite has to be the city world, where you scale a large apartment complex, make your way through a factory filled with conveyor belts, explore the inside of a large tower, and face off against a giant bug in a game of basketball on the roof of a building. The levels are all interesting and unique in their own ways, from the city and its vertical level design, to Wario's castle with its many secret areas, to the cave with lots of water and switches, to the final castle that acts as one big gauntlet of mechanics you saw through the rest of the game. Visually and musically, Wario Land 2 is very impressive and enjoyable. Gameplay-wise, however, the game falls completely flat on its face. First off, the controls. They just don't feel right. They're very clunky and stiff. Wario's running animation has a little bit of startup that just doesn't feel right. And after Virtual Boy Wario Land's smooth as butter controls had me spoiled, it's really hard to go into this game and it not feel really off. While the movement isn't as slow as Wario Land 1's, I would actually say it's worse overall in controls because of the combat. It's been completely overhauled from the previous two titles to emphasize the puzzle-solving aspect of the game, which I'll get more into a little later. The only returning abilities from the first two Wario Land games are the charge attack and the ground pound, which function the same as they did before, but now there are no power-ups to be seen at all. Instead, Wario Land 2 features a large list of transformations that you obtain by pretty much just being attacked by certain enemies. If you get attacked by an enemy that doesn't transform you, however, you just get knocked back, way too much might I add, and lose some coins. This means that you can't actually die. I feel like this wasn't the best decision because 1, it adds to the clunkiness of the combat, and 2, it's counterintuitive to the puzzle aspect of the game. I think that having a 5-hit health bar or something that would send you back to the start of the room you're currently in once you run out of health would have been a better decision, as it gives more incentive to not just brute force your way through the entire game. As far as the transformations go, I don't really like them. I hesitate to call them power-ups because a power-up usually gives you some sort of benefit. For example, I would always strive to have the King Dragon power-up in Virtual Boy Wario Land because it made me more powerful and feel like a badass. However, with the transformations in this game, I almost never want to use them. There's a squishy one where you go in small areas, which is functionally the same as crouching, but it lets you go over one-tile gaps. Pretty situational and almost completely useless, not to mention the fact that it makes you really slow. Then there's the zombie that lets you fall through certain platforms. This isn't actually used for this purpose until the final level of the game, so it's more of a time-wasting hazard than anything else. Again, situational, really slow, and almost useless. There's one that makes Wario even fatter than he already is, and you guessed it, it's extremely slow, situational, and nearly useless. All it does is let you break special blocks that you can't normally break with a ground pound. This basically acts as a gate that you can't pass unless you go back a bit and grab the transformation from a nearby enemy. But because this one wears off after you walk around for a little bit, essentially exercising the obesity away, this has very little potential for any interesting or thought-provoking puzzles. Next, there's a transformation where Wario gets stung by a bee and puffs up in the face to start floating upwards. There's pretty much no potential for making puzzles with this since it limits your movement so heavily, so this just acts as more of a hazard that wastes your time if you get caught by it. However, sometimes it's required to progress through the level, so you might end up just wasting your time killing all the bees assuming that they're just there as obstacles, but you need them to progress, so you have to reload the room and do a bunch of shit all over again. It's really annoying. Oh, and guess what? It's slow as shit too. There's also a Spring Wario transformation that just makes Wario automatically bounce really high off of platforms. It's kind of like the Spring Mario power-up from Mario Galaxy, except you have no control over it whatsoever. Again, since this limits your movement so much, there's really no potential for puzzles with this, and it just acts as more of an obstacle to avoid that wastes your time if you get it. Finally, there's the Small Wario transformation, which is reminiscent of Small Wario from Wario Land 1, but he can jump one tile higher and fit in small gaps. This one at least acts as a bit of a challenge where you need to traverse through an area that only Small Wario can get through while avoiding getting hit or touching water, as those will turn you back to normal. However, this is introduced at the very end of the game and is only used once. The only transformation with any sort of potential for a challenge or a good puzzle, and it's wasted. I wouldn't really call this a transformation, but Wario can also roll down slopes into a ball that can break blocks in your path until you hit a wall. This has the most potential to be useful for puzzles, but it's not used too much throughout the game. It's also very situational, so it just feels like more wasted potential. The reason I bring all the transformations up in such detail is to stress one point. Almost none of them are any fun to use. Because they're hardly useful for any puzzles, they're either a waste of time if you get hit by them, or they're dragging down the pace of the game when they're required to finish a level because they're all so slow. Even when they're useful for a puzzle, you wouldn't want to use them because the puzzles in this game are so poorly done. The puzzles in this game will reward you with one of three things: progress through the level, coins, or a bonus minigame of which there's one in each level where you try and find the matching portrait of an enemy in an amount of time proportionate to the amount of coins you spend in it. There are three difficulties in this minigame: easy, which costs 200 coins, normal, which costs 100 coins, and hard, which costs 50 coins. You can only bet the amount of coins you found in that level. However, as long as you're looking diligently, there are plenty of coins to be found throughout each level, including some big coins that are worth 10 coins each. Anyway, it doesn't really matter which difficulty you pick, because even at the easiest difficulty, you'll only really have time to look at about half of the panels in the time it gives you, so it's often up to a random guess. You can retry as many times as you want, but there are only so many coins in each level, and there's no world map, so it's impossible to retry specific levels without resetting the game. Saving the game from the pause menu does allow you to restart the game from the exact place you saved, almost like a save state, so I guess you could technically use that to get infinite tries on the easiest difficulty, but I didn't think of doing this until after finishing the game, and it really wasn't worth going for anyway. So what does winning this minigame get you? Well, remember those treasures you could find in the first two Wario Land games? It's the same deal here, only now it's locked behind a random, really difficult minigame that costs coins to play. This means you could end up getting all the coins in a level, going back to try the minigame as many times as you can with all your coins, and still not get the treasure for the level without restarting from wherever your last save was, or just playing through the entire game again. But that's not the only minigame like this. When you finish a level, all of your remaining coins are sent to a total coin counter, that is if you have any after wasting them all in the shitty minigame from before. And the coins you have in your total coin counter are used for another minigame that you get once after every level. This minigame has you spend 50 coins to flip one of 9 tiles in a 3x3 panel to reveal parts of an alarm clock style number. Once you've either run out of coins or figured out what the number is, you can select the number to get a tile that goes towards a mural. However, sometimes you just won't have enough coins to be certain what the number is for the panel, and it'll become a guessing game. Because of the random nature and the finite amount of tries you get, I stopped bothering with both the treasures and the panel pieces. Collectibles are supposed to be a reward for playing skillfully, not just being lucky or having enough coins to get more tries at some arbitrary minigame. If the treasures were just sitting there in a chest like the first two games, I wouldn't complain at all, because the puzzles you have to solve to get to them can be pretty cool sometimes. But locking them behind this arbitrary minigame removes all satisfaction you got from solving the puzzle, because now you have another barrier to get through that involves little to no skill at all. This, coupled with the inability to easily replay levels, makes the collectibles not worth getting at all. Let me lay out how this game is structured. After finishing the game, you get a status screen showing you how many levels you finished, how many treasures you collected, and how many panels you got. But then it shows you a map with all the branching paths and slots to show you whether or not you've collected the treasure and panel in each level. Now, I'm not sure if these scrolls mark a point where the game gives you an ending, or if they take you back to the main path here, but had this been available in the pause menu from the beginning of the game, I would have been way more incentivized to look for more secrets. The whole game is paced pretty horribly. I was never sure of how much progress I was really making, because there's hardly any difficulty curve until the final chapter. It made the game feel like it was dragging on, and it only took me about 4.5 hours to beat. So needless to say, I never bothered going back through the game to clean up the missed collectibles or unfinished levels. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention there are occasional secret exits. I'm guessing that's how you get to these branching paths. I found one in the boss level of the first world and was left kinda confused because I knew I was supposed to beat a boss, but just found a regular exit instead. So I went in and it just took me to another chapter. The branching paths are a nice touch that add to the replayability of the game, but for me the game just wasn't enjoyable enough for me to go through replaying levels I already finished to get to other levels that I didn't play at all. To put it into perspective, I beat the game by only playing 50% of the levels in the game, and to play any more than that, I would have had to start the entire game over. The bottom line here is that the game just isn't that fun. The puzzles are mediocre, the transformations are too slow or situational to have any fun with, the movement and combat is clunky, the collectibles aren't satisfying or worthwhile to collect, and the overall level design is just meh. There are a few highlights, such as the bosses. They're mostly pretty fun. My favorite is the one where you play basketball against the giant bug that I mentioned earlier, but what I didn't mention is that you actually have to jump on him to turn him into a ball and throw him into the net, and he tries to do the same thing to you. So you're playing a game of basketball using each other as the ball, and I absolutely loved it, even if the controls didn't really work all that well. This is the kind of stupid, hilarious creativity I want to see more of. Many of the transformations are like this too. Wario eats a piece of cake and gets twice as fat, and he walks around all slow and shakes the ground when he lands from a jump, or when he gets crushed and waddles around through small holes, or when you turn into a zombie, you slowly walk around with this animation that makes it look like your legs are just a pile of goo, and when you land from a fall, you collapse into goo for a second, and you can only go back to normal by walking into light. These ideas are so creative that I really want to like them, but gameplay-wise they're just so boring that any appreciation I do have for the creativity is overshadowed by how poorly executed they are. Anyway, while most of the bosses are pretty cool, the final boss is pretty annoying. See, since you can't die in this game, messing up in a boss fight will usually send you a little further back into the level, so you have to backtrack to where the boss was again to retry it. It's basically the same as dying and restarting from a checkpoint, except the checkpoint is way too far back and you have to backtrack too much. For example, in this fight you have to knock the boss off the side 3 times to defeat it, but if it knocks you off the side, you have to go back around and start the boss over. In the basketball boss, you're given a little bit of leeway since it's a game of first to 3 points, but in the final boss, it's really punishing. I get that it's the final boss, but having to go all the way back around every single time I mess up just to get another try at the boss from the very start again is really annoying. Especially since I spent 15 minutes trying to figure out what I even had to do. For the first 2 hits, Captain Syrup will drop an enemy that you pick up and throw at her, but you have to avoid being pushed up out of the arena by these rising lava spires. For the last 2 hits, you have to catch these bombs that she drops and throw them into the rising lava spires to make them shoot up higher and into her airship. This was the part I couldn't figure out since I kept trying to hit her by throwing the bombs back up at her like I did with the normal enemies for the first 2 hits. However, I will say that this is nowhere near as bad as the final boss from Virtual Boy Wario Land, and I don't have the looming threat of getting a game over and having to redo an entire level. And it wasn't that hard once I figured out what I had to do. Once you defeat Captain Syrup, you get back the bags of money that she stole from you, and you get to live peacefully in your castle. Wario Land 2 is just a mess. While its story is straightforward and well presented, and the visuals and music are both pretty good, the gameplay just does not hold up at all. It has a lot of bright ideas that are dragged down by confusingly stupid mechanics, instances of poor level design, poorly executed puzzles, and a wonky control system. Wario Land 2 just feels like a big step backwards for the series, but I'm still hopeful that Wario Land 3 will fix many of these issues and deliver a fun and satisfying experience. Once I got about halfway through this game, I had lost all incentive to go for any of the collectibles and just wanted to finish the game as fast as possible, and for that reason, I'm ranking it below both the first 2 Wario Land games. Even in Wario Land 1, despite how mediocre the whole game felt, I still had enough fun with it to go for all the collectibles, but with Wario Land 2, I'm just kinda glad it's over already and I can move on to something hopefully more interesting and engaging. Wario Land 2 is just not worth the time, and I really can't recommend it. So, that wraps it up for this review. If you liked it or didn't like it, tell me why in the comments or on my Twitter or something. I'm always looking for more constructive criticism and feedback. Next time, I'll be taking a look at Wario Land 3, also for the Game Boy Color. I'll try to get the TMG video out before then, but no promises. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.